Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture.
Okay, hi. Welcome to Shalom TV, Dimensions of the Daf. I am Mordechai Becher, and we are looking at various issues in the Talmud Daf Yomi, the daily page of Talmud that is being studied. So we're in Tractate Tuvot, and we're starting Perek Yud, the 10th chapter, which is Daf Tzadi, page 90a. Now, the entire 10th chapter, or much of the 10th chapter, the Mishnahs in the 10th chapter deal with men who have multiple wives. So, for example, the first Mishnah starts off, Mishahaya Nasui Shtei Nashim, a man who was married to two women and he died. How do we divide up the Ketuvah, who has the first claim to his property when they both have claims of a Ketuvah, marriage document? The second Mishnah, also Mishahaya Nasui Shtei Nashim, he's got two wives. If you look at Mishnah 4, which I've actually bold-faced there, it's not so easy to see, it talks about Mishahaya Nasui Shalosh Nashim, guy who had three wives. Mishnah number 5, also bold-faced, Mishahaya Nasui Arba Nashim, someone who was married to 4 wives. Interesting, it doesn't go much beyond that. But again, the question we have to ask is, we know that according to Torah law, biblical law, polygamy was allowed. We do find it in the Torah, although the original humans were created, Adam and Chava was male and female, one man, one woman, and throughout the Torah, most of the cases of marriage appears to be monogamous. So we have Abraham married to Sarah, although because they couldn't have children, he also married another wife, Hagar, and had a child. Yitzchak married to Rivka. Yaakov originally only was going to marry Rachel, ripped off by his father-in-law, ended up marrying Leah and Rachel and their maidservants, 4 wives, but he had the 12 tribes of Israel. Or they gave birth to 12 tribes of Israel, could have been an exception as well. Throughout the prophets and writings, aside from the kings who had many, many wives, which was either for political reasons to establish alliances with other peoples, or as Kabbalists say, to bring sparks of holiness into the Jewish people via the king, either way, or to have an impact on those peoples and spread Torah to the people with whom they would marry. But either way, my question is, was it ever the norm? In other words, in the Talmud, did the Talmud consider it normal? Did the Talmud consider it acceptable? Or was it something which is permitted but not the done thing, not usual, not normal? What's the rule? First and foremost, I should point out that today it is prohibited. Code of Jewish Law, in the very first siman, the first section of the Code of Jewish Law in the laws of marriage, the section called Even HaEzer, points out that although it says Nose Adam Kamanashim, a man is allowed to marry a number of women, assuming that he must have but he must have the ability to sustain them all financially. However, the sages said he should not marry more than 4, which actually is interesting because in our chapter in the Gemara, the Mishnah, when it goes through man's married to 2 women, 3 women, the maximum it goes up to, in our Mishnah at least, is 4, which is what is said here in the Code of Jewish Law. And he says, in a place where it's customary to only marry one woman, monogamy, it is prohibited to marry another woman over his wife. And if we look here in the second section I've got listed there, Rabbeinu Gershom Hichrim al Hanoise al Ishto. Rabbeinu Gershom, who was a sage in about, I guess it would have been the 10th century, 11th century, made a decree, a ban of excommunication on marrying more than one woman. So he actually made it prohibited by Jewish law to marry more than one woman, and indeed we see in the Code of Jewish Law, with the exception of when there is a mitzvah like yibum, levirate marriage, etc. However, if you look in further along in the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, he points out that even in such a case, that the chayrim of Rabbeinu Gershon, the ban of Rabbeinu Gershon applies even in a case where it's a mitzvah to marry someone, like when the two brothers, one of them has died without children, the mitzvah for the second brother to marry the widow. However, even there, Rav Moshe Isserles maintains that the cherem, the ban of Rabbeinu Gershon, applies, and therefore you do chalitza, which is a release from that marriage as opposed to actually marrying. And indeed, we will find that, that was Rabbi Yosef Karo who says that. The Ramah, a little further down, just around there, Mikol Makom b'chol medinos elu, in all of our countries, hatakanav aminag b'mkoma omeid, the decree stands in place, and we do not marry more than one wife. So here we have to understand what's going on here. So the Torah says it is permitted. It doesn't state it explicitly, but it appears obvious from the Torah that it is permitted. Was it approved? Now, we know that today it is prohibited. Code of Jewish Law says it's prohibited. However, my question is the following. When Rabbeinu Gershom came and prohibited polygamy, was he legislating the spirit of the law, which already existed? That is to say, was the spirit of the law already monogamous, and saying that the spirit of the law is something you should only marry one wife? It's just that it was permitted because of various circumstances, like maybe yibum, like poverty, and so on and so forth, that it would be permitted to marry more than one wife. And therefore, what Rabbeinu Gershom is doing is taking something which was already the spirit of the law and legislating it, or was he starting a new thing totally that always it was okay and condoned, but now it's prohibited? Rabbi Reuven Margolius, in one of his books called Olalos, in which he comments on the Talmud, Rabbi Reuven Margolius maintains that what Rabbeinu Gershom was doing really was only legislating something which was always the spirit of the law. In other words, it was always looked down upon, even in the times of the Talmud, even in the times of the prophets and the writings. And he brings a number of pieces of evidence for this. First of all, the Pesikta Rabasi, which is on the screen there. In the Pesikta, it says this: Amar Rabbi Yonah b'shem Rebbe. Va'acha kol hashvach hazeh refers to Manoach. Manoach is described as a wonderful, great man, a righteous person. So he says, the Pesikta asks, or Rabbi Yonah asks the following: after all of this praise about Manoach, right? Hakosav bo v'lo shtei nashim. Why does it say he has two wives? Right? How could you praise a person when he has two wives? In other words, what's interesting here is, here it's saying the following: this man is praised as being righteous, and the Pesikta understands it as a contradiction to his righteousness to have two wives. Very interesting, right? V'lama natal shtei nashim. So the answer is, b'shvil vayihi lepnina yeladim v'lachana ein yeladim. Kaven shirasa chana shlo yalda amaloi oimaloi sheyachnis tzarasi lebeisi. What it says here is the following: that once Chana saw that she wasn't able to have children, she suggested to him that he should marry another woman, and the fact that she would be prepared to bring another woman into the household, into the relationship with her husband, that would be enough merit to ensure that she would have a child. So basically, right, it was the suggestion of his first wife, Chana, on the basis of the suggestion from his first wife, Chana, that she wanted the merit to have a child. That is the reason he married two women. But the implication of Pesikta of Kahana is that it's something which is inappropriate and wrong for him to do, and it's a contradiction to the description of him as righteous. So that's the basic idea. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu chayecha Chayech Chana at hifkarata etzli nefashos ani meshalem leich ki pekad Hashem es Chana. And indeed, God did remember Chana and gave her a child in the merit of her being prepared to do this. So very clear from the Pesikta Rabasi, that Chazal, the sages, looked at it as askance. They looked at it as negative. There was that he married 2 women, and a contradiction to describing him as righteous. And the only reason that it was okay, the only reason that he did it was because his first wife suggested it as a merit to her to have children, which is indeed what happened. Another interesting proof he brings, the Gemara in Tanis, it says that on the 15th of Av was a very festive occasion. For various reasons, the Gemara goes through various reasons why the 15th of Av was a time of festivity. One of them was that it was B'nai Yisrael Yotzes V'cholos B'kramim, the daughters of Israel would go out and dance in the vineyards. This is actually Yom Kippur, or on the 15th of Av, was the daughters of Binyamin. They would go out and dance in the vineyards. V'tana, and it says Misha ein lo isha. So it's like it says that anyone who wasn't married would go and try to find a wife there when they went out dancing. Rabbi Reuven Margolis says it is interesting to note. It doesn't say anyone who wanted more than one wife. It says someone who was not married would go there. The implication is that who would be looking for a wife? Someone who was not married. Implication is the norm was one wife. Also, in Yevomis, there are 2 Mishnahs you see in the second part of the screen here, bottom of the screen here. A Mishnah Yevomis. The Mishnah says, "Hamevi get mimdinas hayam v'oma b'fanai nechtav u'b'fanai nechtav." A person comes to a court. He brings a divorce document of a woman who's in this city, and he says, "You know what? It was signed and sealed. It was written and signed in my presence." So it says he's not allowed to marry the woman who is being divorced. He's not allowed to marry the woman who is being divorced. Why is that? And this goes on to say, "Hachacham she'asar se'isha b'neder al bala harei ze lo yisen," or a man, chacham, which means a wise man, a scholar, who prohibited a woman to have relations with a husband as a result of a vow, which was questionable whether the vow actually was a correct vow or not, and he ruled that she is prohibited to marry a husband. Now, of course, they're probably going to get divorced. So this scholar is not allowed to marry that woman. What's the idea of all these cases? Right? The obvious reason, as the Gemara says, the reason that this witness is not allowed to marry the woman, or this scholar cannot marry the woman, is because we suspect that Shema Einav Nasamba, maybe he wants to marry this woman. He wants to marry this woman. So therefore he's suspected. In other words, he comes with this divorce conveniently. Whoa, look at this. I got this divorce and I saw it being written and signed, and he figures now it's a green light, I can marry this woman. So we say, sorry, no, we'll believe him that she is divorced, but he's not allowed to marry her because maybe he is lying, perjuring himself in order to marry this woman who he is attracted to. And the same is true of the scholar who forbade her to her husband for various reasons of the vow, also cannot marry her for the same reason. However, look at what the Mishnah says. In the third last line, bottom of the page, Kulan shahayu lahem nashim, umesu mutaras linasa lahem. The kulush, right, and all of these people, if they were already married, they are allowed umesu, and they died. They are allowed to marry to them. In other words, Rabbi Reuven Margolis says if the witness was married, if the scholar was married, then they are allowed, and then, for whatever reason, and then their wife dies or something like that, they are allowed to get married, because if at the time of the testimony, Margolis says, if at the time of the testimony this person was already married, we can assume he's not doing this, he's not giving the testimony to marry this woman, because that would be unusual, right? Because he's already married. So his conclusion is, I don't know how strong a proof this is, but his conclusion from here is that it appears that it was not the done thing to marry a woman if he's already married. Consequently, we don't suspect him of creating this testimony or divorce in order to marry her. The next proof he brings is from the Medrash Rabbah in Koheles, which is quite a famous Medrash, and there's a parallel Gemara to this as well. But it says this, Baboker zara et zaracha, it says, in the morning sow your seeds, but in the evening do not rest. In other words, the Gemara refers to it as, like Rabbi Akiva, if you had students in your youth, teach students in your old age as well. Because the tragedy that happened to the students of Rabbi Akiva who passed away, who died in the plague, of course and they didn't carry on his heritage, so he had to find new students and teach them. It also refers to someone who had children when he was young, also should have children when he's older. So look at what the Medrash Rabbah says. Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer omer im zarata b'bechir zara ba'afil she'einat yodei eizem is kaim lacha. Im ha'bechir v'im ha'afil. If you sowed in the early season, sow late, because you don't know which one will be successful. Ki ein chayadei eizi yichsha o zeh. Rabbi Yeshua omer nasasa isha bi'alduscha. If you married someone in your youth, umesa, and she died, tisa beziknuscha. Marry someone in your old age as well. So, what's interesting, so it's giving advice. He got married at a young age, may have had children, etc. Baboker Zara, he sowed his seeds when he was young. What it's saying is, don't stop. Right? If his wife died, he should marry someone else and also have children, even though he is older. So what's interesting, Rabbi Reuven Margolis points out is, it says, Nasa isha bi'alduscha u'meisa. He married a woman in his youth and she died. He should now marry someone in his old age. If it was the norm, if it was approved, if it was appropriate and condoned to marry more than one woman, then it shouldn't have had the word u'meisa. She died. It should have just said, you married a woman when you were young, marry another one when you're older. Right? That's not what it's saying. Right? What it says here is, no, only if he married when he was young and she unfortunately died, then he should marry another woman. But if he is married to a woman when he was young and she is alive still, it doesn't advise him to marry another woman. Even though you could say the same, you could make the same logic. You could say, well, what do you mean? He should have children in his old age as well. So even if his first wife is beyond childbearing age, marry another woman and she'll have children too, a younger woman. Answer is that evidently, Rabbi Reuven Margolis points out, evidently from the Midrash, it appears that he's not allowed to, or it's not condoned. He shouldn't do that. The assumption that he's going to marry another woman so he can have more children is only if his first wife died. Very, very interesting. I remember I was, a few years ago, I was in Israel, went on a jeep, we went on a jeep tour in the Judean desert and went to visit some Bedouins. So I was sitting with the sheikh and we were schmoozing. I had a little smattering of Arabic, he had some Hebrew, we had a guy who spoke both Hebrew and Arabic fluently, so we were getting along, we had a good time. So he asked me how many children, I said I have 6 children. So he says, so he says, so you're going to marry another woman now, so have some more kids? I said, no, it's not something I do. He said, what do you mean it's not something you do? You want more kids, right? So it's interesting, he was suggesting, what he was suggesting is not what the Medrash is suggesting. The Medrash is saying that it's not condoning polygamy, it's only saying that if the person is no longer married, because unfortunately his wife passed away, maybe he divorced or whatever, then he should marry another woman in his old age. Again, similar along the lines of what we're saying, that the spirit of the law, it was never condoned, that was not the norm. And indeed, Rabbi Reuven Margolis points out, before I get to the next proof, that in all through the Talmud, and all through the Mishnah, and all through the prophets, it's very, very few and far between do you have cases of a man with multiple wives. When it mentions the wives of the Tanaim, authors of the Mishnah, or of the Talmud, it's almost always one man, one woman. Here is a Gemara in Moed Cotton, which is a rather lengthy piece. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's talking about... Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said to his son, look, these two people, Reb Yonasan ben Asimai and Reb Yehuda ben Gerim, these are two, he says to his son, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said to his son, look, these two important people. B'nei Adam halalu anashim shel tzurahim, these people are they're appropriate, they're good people. He says they're people of tzurah, meaning people who are in control of themselves, people who are prestigious scholars, and people who are righteous. He says, Zil gabehun delivarchucha, you should go and get a blessing from them. So Shimon Bar Yochai was very impressed by these two scholars who had come to talk to him about various issues, learning about the Nedarim, about vows, and he told his son, I want you to go and get a blessing from them because they're good people. So they said to the son, what are you doing here? He says, Dad said to me to come to you and get a blessing. So they gave a whole bunch of very strange blessings. They said, you should sow and not harvest. You should go in and not go out. You should go out and not go in. Your house should be like a dump. You should you should not see a new year. I mean, all types of strange statements. So he comes back to his father and he says, look, you told me that they should give me a blessing, and not only did they not give me a blessing, but they basically insulted me and cursed me. So now, just I should point out, why did they do this? The reason is that they were smart enough. What they wanted is that he should come back to his father, tell them what they said, and then his father would explain that everything they said was indeed a blessing. That way they'd have a dual blessing from them and from their father, who they maintained was a greater tzaddik, more of a righteous person than they were. So they wanted him to go back to the father, have the father explain what they said as really blessings. That way they'll get the blessing from a really righteous person in their humility, who they believe was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. So anyway, their various blessings was the following. Tizra v'lo tichtzad, in other words, sow seeds, don't harvest, means they meant Tolid banim v'lo yimusu, have children who will not die. That they'll not die in your lifetime, they will live on. Ta'ayel v'lo teifek, you'll go in and not go out. Ta'ayel kalasa v'lo yimusu banach delifkun. Right, that you should bring in more children, i.e. a daughter-in-law, and not have to and God forbid your child should not die and have to find another husband for your daughter-in-law. So a lot of strange blessings. You should go out and not. You should bring in and not go out. Meaning you should bring in a daughter-in-law, and God forbid you should not. The son should not die, but should live long with his wife. You should send out, meaning send out your daughters to get married. They should not ever have to come back to your house because their husbands, God forbid, died. In other words, these are statements which are on the surface sound strange, but when he explains them, they're really blessings. And then he says, Lichrov Beisa, your house should be destroyed, V'leisuv ushpizeich, and return to becoming a guest. He says, refers to Hai Alma ushpizeich, Vahi Alma Beisa, because the world to come is your true home, and this world is not. So this world you should look at as not your real home, but as you are a guest here, and the world to come is where your true home is. That your bed should be messed up, you have lots of children. And the last is the most significant here. I've actually bold-faced it. It's the second last line, end of the second last line. Don't see a new year. You should not see a new year. What does that mean? Sounds like a curse. So he says, no. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai explains to his son, that's a blessing. You know what it means? Your wife should not die, that you should have to marry a new woman. In other words, a new year. So what he's saying here is, the blessing he gives is, you should not have to ever remarry a new wife because your wife will not die. What's the implication? That it must have been that the norm is he would not marry a new woman unless his wife passed away. If it was normal to marry more than one woman, this would be a silly blessing. What do you mean? Why should his wife die in order for why should it need his wife to die to marry someone else? If it was normal to have polygamy, if it was normal to marry another woman, then this would not be a blessing. Right? But the fact that it was not the norm to marry someone else, if he already was married, unless his wife died, then this would be a blessing, that his wife should not die. He should not have to get ever remarried. We find also, Baba Basra, Tzadik Aleph, Amar Rab Yitzchak, Oisa Yom Shabasa Rus HaMa'aviyah LeEretz Yisrael, Mesa Ishta Shel Boaz. Right, the day that Ruth came back to Israel from the fields of Moab, right, we are told that the wife of Boaz died. Boaz was destined to marry Ruth, and from them will come, of course, King David. So Boaz's wife died on the day that Ruth comes back to Israel. What's the idea? Haina damri inshi. That's what people say. Ad deloy shachiv shichva kaima mino beise. Until, right, the new house is not going to come in till the old house dies. The implication here is Boaz would not have married her if he was already married. And indeed, it appears that's what Boaz was saying when he says, I don't want lo ashchis as the other Redeemer said, I don't want to destroy my lo ashchis es nachalasi, I don't want to destroy my inheritance. The Targum Onkelos says what it meant is he didn't want to destroy his present household or his present marriage by marrying someone else in addition to his present wife. So now, interestingly enough, that's the Goel who did not redeem Ruth or the field. So what Boaz, in a similar situation, it says divine providence organized it that his first wife died so that he would feel free to marry Ruth. Implication is he wouldn't have felt free to marry Ruth had his first wife not died. And the Rashbam, as the Rashbam says, if you look under here, Meisa Ishto Shel Boaz Lashmina Nasa Shakodesh Baruch Hu Makdim Refuah Lamaka. Hashem precedes the healing the cure is there even before the problem, right? A man should trust God before even his first wife died. The person who's going to run his house, the person who's going to be the replacement, is already there. So his wife dies, but Ruth has already come into the land of Israel. She's not yet in Bethlehem, she's not yet where he lives, she's already in Israel though. So the idea behind this is that, of course, God has given the cure for Boaz, that a new wife, as his wife dies, but the problem is, why did it have to be so? It could have been a situation where he married two women. He would have married Ruth as well. The answer of Reuven Margolis gives is because it appears that would not be the appropriate thing to do. And God wanted him to marry Ruth. This was the destiny, the Jewish people, that he should marry Ruth. And of course, they should have from them coming King David and eventually the Mashiach. So we see all the way from the Psiktader of Kahana, all the way through the Mishnah, and indeed through the Talmud, and even if we go back to the Tanakh, the prophets and the writings, it appears that the norm was not polygamy but monogamy, that a man to marry only one woman, and that would be the ideal. So when Rabbeinu Gershom, as we saw in the Code of Jewish Law, gave a ban of excommunication on a man who would marry more than one woman, what he was doing was not something which was new and novel. What he was doing was he was giving legislative power, giving halachic or legal power to something which was already the norm, already the custom, and already the ideal. So that the norm, the custom, the ideal, and the sanctity of the family was such that there was a man and a woman, one man, one woman, and that is the ideal. What Rabbeinu Gershom did was just seal that into halacha, into Jewish law. So that is how Reuven Margolis, some of the proofs, I don't know if they're ironclad, but I think it appears to me that there definitely was a trend that Reuven Margolis is saying is certainly seems to be true, that throughout our history, Torah, prophets, writings, Mishnah, and Talmud, the norm seems to have been only to marry one woman, which is, of course, the ideal, and that creates the sanctity of Jewish family life. Rabbeinu Gershom, Me'or Hagolah, the light of the exile, merely put that into legal practice, into legislative power, but it was already the norm. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Mordechai Becher at Shalom TV, Dimensions of the Daf. If you want to get my book, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Jewish bookstores, artscroll.com. And if you're interested in other classes or events that I teach, or at Gateways, gatewayesonline.com. Thanks very much for listening. ShalomTV.com, and we'll see you around.
If you'd like to purchase a copy of Rabbi Mordechai Becher's book, Gateway to Judaism, The What, How, and Why of Jewish Life, visit www.artscroll.com. And for information about Rabbi Becher's upcoming classes and seminars, visit www.gatewayonline.com.